All right, it's getting a little crowded in here. Kevin Kervick's a little early. He has joined us. We have Steve Kenda. He's our guest this hour. Mike Rogers is manning the video. And I have Spreaker started a little late, but under control. And
Tony,
who's over there.
we're going to encourage to say something sooner or later. He's very savvy politically and is very well aware of the British scene.
Well, we'll fit him in.
And a student of what we're doing, too.
We'll bring him on board here at the end. His segment ends in 20 minutes, and then we'll get a little wild for a couple minutes, and then we'll start talking to Kevin in the next segment about social justice warriors and why he's running as an independent candidate and all these other good things. All right, so Stephen Kenda, District 24, Seacoast, State Senate, 4-person primary. I could actually say 4-man primary because they're all... Well, we don't really know if they're all men, but they appear to be. Anyway, we don't want to get into that now. Actually, we do. We're going to get into that next segment.
Yeah, how do they identify today?
I don't know. I'm running as a woman this week. So, all right, what a great world we live in. Anyway,
if I ran that way, I'd be arrested.
Do we want to get into education? Or is it just too big of a pie to chew on right now?
I think I share the concern that other parents. I see what my child is about to be exposed to, and he's only 4, so I've been able to insulate him to some degree. But I'm going to be in the position of having to make a choice, and I have the luxury or the privilege, or whatever, however you want to describe it, of being able to provide choices for my son. Mm-hmm. Not every parent does. And right now, the way things are shaping up, my son will not be attending public school. I do not want him exposed to what Common Core is bringing into the school system.
As a state senator, you would have an opportunity to provide that to everyone. As you said, Governor Hassan just vetoed a bill that was meant to clarify existing statute, which, in our collective opinion at Granite Rock, already gives children choice because of the Croydon school situation, where they were sending tuition and students to a different school, which happens all over the state. Schools in New Hampshire send students to schools in other states with taxpayer dollars. They send them to schools in their own towns that are different, that are private with taxpayer dollars. And yet the State Department of Education, the governor, the education lobby all said, no, you can't do that, da-da-da-da-da.
Her decision to veto that was an awful decision. Her decision to bring Bill Duncan, who was actually suing the state at the time, onto the Board of Education was an awful decision. And as soon as we get a Republican in the corner office and we maintain our positions in the House and the Senate, we will get school choice and we will get rid of Common Core. If I have anything to do with it, we will get rid of Common Core.
I think school choice is a huge start there because I think that if you can only get one of those things, you definitely get school choice, you get the mobility, and it allows parents to choose, and then you make sure they understand it and make it as simple as possible for them to do it, because then when they see what their children are learning, my kids came up through elementary school with everyday math, which was before the precursor to, but it was the next great best thing. And they would come home with their homework, and I would look at it, and you would have this grid and all these things, and I would say, and they would have, it would take them 10 minutes to figure out a simple math problem, and I would just go over and go, do this. You're done. Do something else. Do the next problem. It was just simpler, same answer. Math you grew up with. Math you grew up with. Math we all grew up with. Worked. It was math that worked. Now they added all these extra steps and all these extra tasks. And then how are you comfortable? Who cares if you're comfortable? It's math. you know?
I mean, basically, we grew up with fact-based history, fact-based science, method-based science. Reading and literature as it had evolved, and and math that was done the way it was invented, frankly. And now
you and Newton were doing it the same way.
Yeah, but until Einstein and a couple others discovered add-ons, but they were add-ons, But we had these waves of revolutions in thinking, and to my mind, sitting in Britain at the time when some of these came across, they were basically invented in California and worked their way across.
Chicago.
Fads in education, fads in methods of reading and pronunciation that made it harder for the kids to be literate, and fads in mathematics that made it harder for them to get their heads around the numbers and the grand scheme of things. If you read the great mathematicians of the 20th century, one of my favorites being W. Sawyer. Math is beautiful. Math is something you can get kids excited about. and then they dumb it down and teach it to them in story form where the actual numbers don't matter so much as following the plot line. What kind of mathematics is this?
Education is an institution. It's now become far more bureaucratic, too much money invested in the administrative side rather than the actual teaching. The teachers' union is a corrupt, politicized organization. The teachers' union needs to be dissolved. I'm not being critical of teachers. I think there are some very good teachers out there who are deeply concerned about this investment in the Common Core. And even beyond Common Core, if you look at what's available from a technological perspective, how much technology has changed today, if you can actually, the gamification of education, making it so much easier for kids to advance, to learn, to move forward, and yet we struggle and stay in this institution because that's what it's become over time. It needs to be, in some ways, radically reformed. If you can think about tearing it down and starting over, what would parents and teachers do today if they had to start from scratch? And if we get more people to think about starting from scratch, getting rid of that union, creating some competition, that's where
and that's basically what the charter schools do. Is they've reinvented the methods of teaching. It's still not radically different from what's in the public schools, but they do it with less teachers and more innovation, and they get a better result. Which of the heads of the teachers' unions was it that said it's not about the children? Don't kid yourself for a minute. It's about the power. Was that?
I don't remember.
Shanker?
But it's a union, definitely a union leader.
No. But it was a teachers' union.
It was an actual quote. I'm trying to think who that
was. It Shanker?
Look it up.
I thought it was AFL-CIO. No, it wasn't.
No, it was the teachers' union. It's not about the kids. It's about authority. It's about power.
Yeah.
I just lost my train of thought. We had Jody Underwood on a couple weeks ago with Ian, and they were talking about the Croydon and the bill she just vetoed, which was they were trying to get him to kill it, but they managed to fix it. They didn't think it was fixable, but the House actually fixed it so that we would have choice again. And she talked about a book, and I can't remember the name of it, but it was written by a guy who went overseas and investigated how people in third world countries educated their children. What did they do? Because they had all the choices in the world. They could choose any system they wanted because it was just them, parents. There wasn't any money coming from the government. And I wish I could remember the name of the book. If you look it up on Grok Talk, you'll be able to find it. But they just formed these like homeschool groups, basically, like a bunch of parents, and they'd have a group of kids, and the parents would teach the kids, and they'd take turns, and the kids grew up learning everything they needed to know to be a part of their culture and their civilization or whatever their town. And that's the system. That's what we used to do. That was the single schoolhouse who, like Croydon has. They have one schoolhouse with a whole bunch of grades. Tony?
Oh, word of warning here, because we've got an issue in Britain at the moment where homeschooling is becoming a serious problem within the Muslim community. We're finding that schools are being set up secretly, children are being segregated, and they're not being integrated into the British way of life.
Oh, that's a huge problem.
That is a huge problem. I can't believe it's not happening here.
It probably is.
We're aware of some schools, but it's transpiring. There's investigators, journalists looking into it, and it's transpiring that there's far more of it going on than we're aware of. And people are not tracking the individual children to see what sort of education they're getting. It's all very well going for homeschooling, but we need to maintain the quality.
We do have, that's absolutely true.
And we need to keep some control of what's going on within that.
There's a lot of that currently. If you want to homeschool in New Hampshire, for example, you have to report to your local superintendent. You have to give them a curriculum, and then they have to present themselves to a representative of the district for testing or review so that they understand what they're being taught.
That's a theory in the UK as well, but it's not happening. It's not, and nobody's challenging it. Nobody's following it.
So they're basically setting up.
Actually being controlled.
They're basically setting up madrasas based around the mosques, and nobody's able to keep track of these children. They don't know what they're learning.
And they're not necessarily based around the mosque. They can be set up quite separately from the mosque. So if you have a moderate mosque, you might well have other parents within that area who are still just bypassing the mosque.
Okay, that's good to know. And that's over. I know Britain's having a whole heck of a lot of trouble with people integrating into the culture and everything.
They're going to vote to get out of the EU. I just read this morning, though. Right? There's 55% support.
More and more likely because
getting out of the EU.
Facebook are really encouraging the youngsters to go out and vote, and they don't really know what the alternatives are.
We just posted today, just to get off track for a second, on that. at Granite Rock, and let me find it because it's right here.
Yeah, 55% of the people who are in the current poll are support getting out of the EU.
As much as 55. That's actually a good thing. I believe that they are having their suffocating federal bureaucracy moment right now across Europe, and that Britain is better placed than any other country to get out and make their own way. They have their own country. They have a long-established tradition of individual rights and parliament and free speech
and currency.
Now, kind of their own currency.
Right.
Now, some of that stuff's been eroded over time. If I was still living in Britain and I was independently wealthy, I would start a Magna Carta society, a bit like the Federalist Society, right? whose goal would be to restore individual rights.
It's funny to think about the analogy to individual rights here in the state of New Hampshire vis-a-vis the federal government. It's not all that exactly.
All right, we have 8 minutes left with Steve, so let's get back to him real quick before we go off into Britain again. Opioid crisis. That's the other banner headline news type story. I'm a Theodore Dalrymple kind of guy when it comes to the opioid crisis. I've read all of his books about heroin addiction and how it's pretty much a marquee media thing. That it's pretty simple to get out of it, that it takes a long time to get addicted to it, but that when it starts, the bureaucracy creates an entire self-serving industry for itself to solve a problem that only gets bigger, because if it doesn't, they go away. I think New Hampshire's on the cusp of that. Obviously, we have people dying. So, I mean, something has to happen. What do you think about what we're doing now, and what would you do different, if anything?
Well, I feel the same sense of us moving towards the situation where what we're going to be looking for is funding for drug courts and drug treatment facilities. And I think you need to look at the two issues around the origin of the problem and the supply issues. If I'm mistaken, then you check me on this, but my understanding is that 80 to 90% of the current heroin addiction problem here are people who are moving from prescription painkillers to heroin. If, in fact, that's the case, then I'll give you an example. I mean, I went in for an infection. I had an infection in my arm that was spreading, and along with the antibiotics and the intravenous that they needed to give for that, the prescribing physician also gave me a prescription for painkillers. I said, now, I'm not that much in pain. I don't really need a prescription for a painkiller. So I took it home. We shredded the pain-killing prescription. I don't mean to digress to like the Federal Reserve printing money for the past 8 years, but it's as though we live in a society that doesn't want to experience or feel any pain. I don't know if you're probably around back in the 89 to 91 period when virtually every bank in New Hampshire was being shut down by the FDIC, and people were losing their homes, jobs. It was a serious economic crisis. But you know what? It was over in 3 years because we took the pain and we dealt with it. Whereas what's going on now, what's gone on since the housing crisis in 2008 has all been about pump as much money, throw as much cash out, and of course that money gets unequally displaced to different pockets and different corners. And you see that with the opioid. The relevance to the opioid crisis is start where the source is. If, in fact, it's coming from prescription painkillers, if that's why people, when that prescription gets shut down, if that's what's leading to heroin addiction, then we need to, one, address that problem. My other focus, and that's where Granite Hammer comes in, is the supply issue. And I think I've seen a little bit of the spat between the Sununu camp and the Manchester police, and I'm hoping that that situation is going to change over time and that they'll find a way to work together. Manchester, they've had some success working with the DEA, and I know there's been a bit of a flurry up at the State House about getting some additional funding, but anything that we can do to contain or eliminate the supply side of it. I have a very tough position on the drug supply issue. And we found some, what I'd call the retail suppliers. I think there's a lot of been arrests in the retail. What I want them to start doing is finding the wholesale suppliers and getting rid of them. I mean,
there's it's a very interesting story. I'll tell you what I told everybody else. If you want to read about what happened in Britain, read Romancing Opiates by Theodore Dalrymple. He's got another one out that's more recent that also addresses the same thing, and I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but it's about building the bureaucracy to address the problem that the bureaucracy creates. It creates this circular thing.
They call it medical iatrogenesis. Right?
Is that the technical term for it?
So the cure creates the cause, or
Right.
creates the problem, because
Yeah.
the more you grow the cure, the more problems you
And
make.
that's the thing.
And that's like everything that government does.
That's what worries me.
As you put a machinery in place to deal with a problem,
Right.
you now can't have the problem go away, or else you don't justify the machinery. So Tony was actually an employee of the machinery. In effect, in Britain, he was a drug guidance counselor employed by private companies. So he can tell you a lot about how the system works in the UK, and probably we do a little more of that in the second hour, because we don't want to take away from Steve right now.
But it's a tough situation, and my concern is the bureaucracy. Obviously, we have a situation where we have people who are gatewaying from prescription drugs to illegal drugs. Drugs are illegal. But we have to just make sure that we don't turn it into this, like gambling, this state monopoly. All right, if you want to help support private organizations who are going to work with people, whether it be through therapy, whether it be detox, which is, as I understand it, about 3 days where you have awful flu-like symptoms, but there's no threat to your life, to help people out, and then help them stay off, which is what Arcanon is for. We have private organizations that already get support that can handle these kinds of things. Just direct these people towards them and help them understand that their life can be so much better than just being in a haze all the time. Once we go down that road where we create that bureaucracy, that's never going to go away. And that's what
find
we
mission
need.
creep. It'll find
Right,
somewhere.
Right. So let me just throw something in that general area. One of the things that's noteworthy is that there are split requirements upon doctors. On the one hand, their mandate to treat the symptoms, to minimize the pain, and the customers, the patients, will even get forms asking, was your pain adequately treated? So the doctor's in fear and trembling of not prescribing enough painkiller. And then on the other hand, you get situations like we had in Florida a few years ago, and you get periodically around the country, where the state government or the federal government will go after the pharmacies and the doctors for over-prescribing and creating the problem. Well, damn, on the one hand, we told you to prescribe enough, and on the other hand, we're going to chase you if you prescribe too much. And, the split between the two means quite often the patients aren't treated as well as they could be. The doctors are in fear and trembling of their licenses, and nobody's being allowed to use their own judgment.
How do people reach you, help support your campaign, donate, whatever you need?
The website is the easiest way to do that at Kenda for Senate. That's Kenda, the digit 4 Senate.com. Plenty of information out there about how to either get a hold of us. Happy to answer any questions. There's a Kenda for Senate Facebook page. If anybody wants to reach out, comment, and feel free to reach me there as well. So just say thank you, Steve and Mike, for having me this morning.
All right, well, we'll probably have you on again, and hopefully before the primary and hopefully after
Terrific.
the primary. All right, Steve, thank you very much. We're going to take a break. Everybody stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Excellent.